I was born in Hollywood, California in 1954. My folks met at Stanford. They were both college kids. So, like, you know, from the beginning, it was not a question. We were all going to college. Mm-hmm. Unlike some people that have their, you know, their interview here, it was not a question. We were going. Mm-hmm. So I grew up first in Pasadena and then in Capistrano Beach, mm-hmm. in Southern California. I'm the oldest of 4 kids. Mm-hmm. I started photography classes. I'd started taking pictures pretty young, but my first class was in high school, a sophomore, and it was funny because it was in boys' shop, and there were like 2 girls in boys' shop photography. Mm-hmm. So, you know, trailblazers. And I loved photography. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty artsy-fartsy. Photography was so great because it was pretty immediate. I mean, you developed film, but you'd see the negative right then. Mm-hmm. And when we built our house in Capistrano, they put in a darkroom for me. They were very supportive, and their friends were very supportive. One of my dad's friends gave me a camera, and a family friend, like my second dad, his dad was a photographer also, and so when his dad died, Jim brought all of his equipment to me. Mm. And so I already had almost everything I needed, but still. Mm. So all through high school, I photographed. I was a yearbook photographer. I went to college at Berkeley. Mm-hmm. So there was, you know, mom and dad went to Stanford, but by the time we came around, you couldn't afford to go to Stanford. Mm-hmm. So I ended up at Berkeley, and eventually so did the other kids. So there's the other 3. So I got a degree in history of art. I really loved the concept of teaching visually because I think it really works. And so I have a degree in history of art, and I got a teaching credential, and I taught photography. And all my student teaching, the primary thing was I was a student teacher of photography at Oakland High School in an ROP/ROC program, which meant that people from all over the Bay Area would come to learn photography. So it was very in-depth. And then, after I got my teaching credential, Prop 13 passed in California, which meant there were no teaching jobs. So I went back to work for my dad in the food business, and also took night classes at the local junior college, who had a fabulous department in photography. I mean, it was great. And I realized that if I was working for Dad 40, 50, 60 hours a week, but still going to night class and staying until like 2 in the morning, you know, in the darkroom there, I should probably take this seriously. So yeah, I would shoot a lot of different things. I was gonna be a fashion photographer for a while, but it ended up being like selling fantasies to the masses. It wasn't real. And I ended up really liking in-depth social documentary work. And I thought if I went back to school to get a master's, I could do a big project for my master's thesis, and if it worked, you know, then I knew I could be a photographer, like the old Life magazine photographers. And if I wasn't any good at it, I would still have a master's. So off I went back to Berkeley, and the Cow Palace in San Francisco is the most local rodeo. So that was my hometown rodeo. And I'd gone with a roommate during undergraduate years because she grew up on the peninsula south of the city, San Francisco. And she used to go to the Cow Palace all the time. So we'd go every year. And I really never thought of it photographically. But when I went back to get my master's, there was a guy who was also in the program. There were only 4 of us. He was from Holland. And he was so disappointed when he got off the plane and it wasn't Monument Valley. Because, you know, he grew up watching John Ford movies, and that's what he thought it'd be. So I said, don't worry. There's a rodeo coming up in San Francisco, and I'll take you, and you'll see plenty of cowboys. And he goes, can we take our cameras? I said, sure. So that was the first time I went and took pictures of a rodeo. And then over the next couple months, I shot a lot of other ideas, but the only project that I didn't see the light at the end of the tunnel pretty quickly was rodeo. It was, who knew if I could do it? It was this combination of America's 2 major icons, the athlete and the cowboy. It was, you know, kind of like this closed guy thing. And I thought, I have no idea if I can do it, but that's the biggest challenge, so let's see. And I'd go around to rodeos and I'd take pictures and I'd bring pictures back and give them to people and explain who I was and what I was doing. And they'd hear I was from Berkeley and they go, are you a radical? I said, actually, yes. Photographing rodeo at Berkeley is pretty radical. So I was working for Ansel Adams as a workshop assistant. And the first year, all of us assistants had to take photographs down and put them up in a gallery. And I was the only one that had people in it because everybody else was more similar to Ansel. Landscapes, and we call it roots and rocks. And Ansel was really taken. He and his wife really liked my work. And they said, they invited me through one of their assistants for lunch after the workshop was over. And so there I am sitting at the lunch table with Ansel and Virginia and all the people that work there. And that in and of itself, I applied to be a student at an Ansel workshop through one of my teachers at Orange Coast College when I was taking the night classes. He was pretty supportive of me going on with my photography work. And so he said, I really think you should try to get into the Ansel workshop. So in those days, we sent slides of our work, and Ansel looked through them, and he was the one that decided who was coming. And then there were like 5 other instructors at each workshop. And it ended up there were 2 workshops in August. So it would be 1 week, a day off, and then another week. And after my first year as an assistant, they asked me to come for both weeks because there weren't that many women assistants. And a workshop assistant is like a glorified camp counselor. And when my group was in seeing Ansel, and it was so cool. As a student, I was in the last workshop that was held in Yosemite because he was getting old and he shouldn't go up to those elevations. So we had our meeting with Ansel at his house. So you're sitting in the front room at Ansel's house with your group, and one of my students asked if there were any if there were any young photographers coming up that he was impressed with. And you know that one of his assistants told him about me, but also that he'd seen my work and liked it. And so Ansel says, well, yes, your assistant, Sue, is doing really interesting work, and she's very good photographing people. And, you know, your head gets really big, and you have to walk sideways through doors. And then Chris Rainier, who was one of his assistants, said, like the next day, said, Ansel and Virginia want to know if you can stay over and come to lunch. And I said, sure. What are you going to say, no? So I went to lunch the day after the workshop ended, and that's when Ansel said, so what are you thinking about doing with the rodeo work? And I said, well, I'm thinking about doing it for my master's thesis. Either that or the Indian tribes around the town of Oaxaca. And he said, you know what? You do really well photographing people, and not everybody does. And rodeo has only been done by people photographing like the champions. And he says, you seem to get along with everybody. And I do. And he said, you know, we really think you should do the rodeo for your master's thesis. What are you good? Okay. Ansel says, yes. Yeah. Yeah. So what was great was that I had this relationship with him that from then on, that, you know, well, let me see some of your work, Toots. And I was able to introduce my whole family to Ansel. One Thanksgiving, we all met in Monterey, and Ansel was having a gallery opening in Carmel. And I said, okay, we're going to go, and I'm going to introduce you. My parents didn't think I really knew him, right? So it was so awesome to go to the gallery, and it was so packed. And I said, everybody hold hands. We're just going to try and get to Ansel and not look at pictures. And so we all got there, and he sees me, and he goes, Toots, you're here. And I said, hi, Ansel. I said, I brought my folks to meet you. My whole family is here. And he says, Mr. and Mrs. Rosoff, it's so nice to meet you. Your daughter does great work. You know, it was like, whoa. So I have a picture. He was really funny. I was trying to decide in between the Ansel workshops if I should fly up to Reno for a gay rodeo. And Ansel was wearing my rodeo jacket around the house. And I was really tired. And I'm trying to decide. And Air California flights were like $60 round trip. So I could have gone and come back. And he comes back into the kitchen where I was sitting, and he says, do you suppose all they use is geldings at those rodeos? Which is, right, hilarious. You don't think Ansel's going to say something like that, which, you know, but it was hilarious. So yes, I had a great relationship with him, and I saw him the night before he died. That's what gave me, I think, the confidence to just do it. I mean, I might have had the confidence before, but when you have that blessing, well, yeah, and when I went and looked at other books and stuff, they were all about the world champions, and one guy had followed Larry Mahan and stuff, and they were good, but it wasn't about all of rodeo. And it wasn't about because as I started going, I realized that 5% of the rodeo is at the rodeo, and the other stuff you didn't know about. And that was the stuff I was interested in. So in '83, I drove myself around to rodeos, and I realized I'm not photographing them on the road. So I have to do that. So, and I thought it'd take 1 or 2 years. No. So the next summer and over the year, I started asking people, if I go on the road, will you take me with you? And some people said no. But a lot of people said yes. And so in '84, my sister took me to Reno. I wouldn't let her leave until I caught a ride out, but I did catch a ride out. And from there to Cheyenne, so like a month and a half, I just caught rides wherever I could get to with whoever had room. I'm documenting rodeo for my master's thesis, and I want to, I'm looking for rides so I can photograph you. Sometimes it took a while, but also people had started recognizing me from being at different rodeos and showing my work. And then because I was doing the behind the scenes work, they put a lot of it in the pro rodeo sports news, which had up to then been mostly bucking pictures or roping pictures. And I was getting the human interest stuff. Like I could say, did you see the photograph of so-and-so in the last sports news? Yeah. I said, that's the kind of stuff that I'm shooting. That was mine. And they go, oh, okay. So if they had room, they pretty much took me with them. I mean, nobody else had ever done this, as far as I could tell. And at least in this area, time period of rodeo. And especially not a girl. So usually single women photographers at rodeos were suspect. And so they decided already that I was trying to get into their pants, which I wasn't. It was like I seriously did not want to do anything like that because I wanted them to take me seriously. So some of the situations were pretty dodgy, but sometimes, you have to have a sense of humor. And if you don't have a sense of humor and you're trying to do this, it's not going to work. Right. And I would have to be willing to drive and whatever. I remember one ride I caught in '85. I also went in the spring, and I caught a ride with Bruce Ford, Bob Logue, Mike Flanagan, a couple other guys. And we got to Florida. We all got a motel room together, and I was the last one to shower. I got a washcloth to dry off, and it was so hot and humid. I'm like trying to pull my Wranglers on, and they're, but it's like you deal with it. It's the photography was more important than anything else. So they all got used to me, and I became the fly on the wall that I wanted to be. Anything that announced itself as something to document. I don't know if you've looked at my work. So there's one of a guy getting a ticket in the side view mirror. That's the most popular in rodeo. The three guys laughing, Mark, Doug, and Daryl, they were sitting after the rodeo at Cheyenne. They were sitting there laughing and telling stories. And I saw it and I went, oh. So I squatted down and was, just staying there, waiting and they all stopped talking and were looking at me. And I shook my head, and then they realized I was going to stay there, so then they just started talking again, and I got it. I didn't know till the film was developed. Not like now with digital where you see it automatically. So when I saw that negative in the dark room, I was doing the happy darkroom dance. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of other ones that I didn't usually try to pose things in the beginning because I didn't feel like it was natural, but people would say, get us this picture here, you know, and there'd be a group of people, guys, and so I'd always take that. And I really was interested in the family, so if a family member was there, I would try and take a family picture. I mean, you just have to be ready. One of the things Ansel used to say was, chance favors the prepared mind. Mm-hmm. And so basically, if you and your camera are ready, then when something happens, you will get it. Mm-hmm. So that was how I still shoot. Mm-hmm. So in 1985, I graduated with my master's from Berkeley, and I had sold a 50-piece show to the Wyoming State Museum in Cheyenne. Mm-hmm. And they were going to have the show opening at the museum during Frontier Days. During the Daddy, mm-hmm. Cheyenne Frontier Days. So my whole family came up with me, and we went, you know, to the rodeo, and then we had the show opening, and a lot of the cowboys came over to see themselves on the wall of a museum. And Hawkeye Henson, who was a 3-time saddle bronc rider, he said, Sue, why don't you come rodeoing with me for a few weeks in September? And I said, sure. And my dad's there, and he's like, I thought you were finished. Mm. But, you know, when an opportunity, he used to say, when the tarts are passed, you take them, mm-hmm. you know. So here's an opportunity so I had to go. Mm-hmm. And then I kept going, and I kept trying to figure out what else I needed. And in '87, this guy named Lane Frost from here in Oklahoma, he was the bull riding champion. And Red Rock, who was a bucking bull that had never been ridden, he was the bull of the year. Mm-hmm. And Lane had always wanted to ride an unrideable bull because his mentor, Freckles Brown, had ridden Tornado. Mm-hmm. And John Growney owned Red Rock, and they were from Red Bluff, which is about 2.5 hours drive north of Berkeley. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, I need to photograph another stock contractor, because I'd been on the road, I caught rides, and ended up in Pueblo, which is a Harry Volt rodeo, and their ranch is really close, so I caught a ride with them back to the ranch and photographed Harry at the ranch and at the road, different rodeos everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I needed another stock contractor, so I called John and asked him if I could come photograph him before, during, and after his rodeo, which is in April. Mm-hmm. And he said, sure, come on up. So I got up there, and he told me, Lane and I talked over the winter, and we put together a series of challenges between him and Red Rock for this year. We're going to try and fill the seats on the slow nights or performances at these rodeos, and then they added a 6th. And I was there for the first one in Red Bluff, and there was such a reaction by the people in the stands that I came back to the ranch, and I said to John, you have to do something with this story, because it'll fly in the real world. And he goes, well, like what? And I said, let me make a few calls. So I called the media director at the PRCA, who I didn't get along with. And I said, so John Growney and Lane Frost have put together this thing between Lane and Red Rock. And he goes, yeah. And I said, I think it'll be a great story. And he says, yeah. And I said, so you're not interested in it? And he said, no. I said, so you don't mind if I run with it, right? And he goes, no, knock your socks off, Rosoff. And then the next call was to George Michael at NBC in Washington, D.C., because he loved bulls and bull riding and bullfighters. And back then it was faxes, FedEx, that's it. And so he wanted me to get the footage from the news places from the day before. And so I called and gave them George's FedEx number, and they shipped him, and he covered the whole thing. And then I called this guy who I'd met on the road, who had been with USA Today and then was with New York Magazine. And I said, I told him about the story, and I said, I'm thinking it's a USA Today story. And he goes, totally. And I have a person that will love it. And he was normally a baseball writer. But I called him, and it's like, oh, this is awesome. So they followed every challenge. So I could, fax him or call him with the score, and they would have like a score box of Lane Frost and Red Rock in USA Today. And all the way through, it was awesome. And I would fax to all the, the little rodeos, newspapers, if there was going to be one of the challenges nearby. And at fairgrounds on the marquee, they would put up the Lane and Red Rock scores. So it went from April to July. So Lane got bucked off the first 2 times. The third rodeo was Reading, and Lane rode Red Rock that night. And it was hard on John, but he was, of all the people, who would you want to ride Red Rock but Lane?
Right.
So
What do you remember about that night?
Oh, it was hot. And I was photographing on the stairs leading up to the announcer's box, and he stayed on. It was like Red Rock would buck away from the hand and usually throw people off in the first jump. And Red Rock was so smart. He was this real gentleman bull. It's almost like it was a bull rider reincarnated in there. And he would get in the chute and lower himself down. And it was imperceptible unless you watched. And so he would come out of the chute and just be like this high off the ground. That's a lot of bull to be this high off the ground. And I saw Lane make the first turn and then the second turn, and then I was like, oh my God, it's gonna happen. Bob Feist was the announcer. He went into the arena to interview Lane. Everybody was running out, like the bullfighters were throwing their arms around him and high-fiving, and other cowboys. So Red Rock had been ridden 311 times before Lane rode him. And so people like Gary Toole, who were there, people who had tried Red Rock, like went out into the arena and shook his hand. It was just awesome. And then there was this whole media storm. Cody Lambert had tried Red Rock a couple times and figured out that Red Rock would hear the gate open and then he'd blow out. But he and John decided, after Lane had gotten seriously frapped the first 2 rides, that maybe they better tell him about the latch. But I think going into it, John saw it as a marketing thing, because, you help your rodeo committees as a contractor. You want to provide something like if they have slow performances, you know, where you're not getting butts in seats, then, and the rodeos that he chose, so there was Red Bluff, they didn't have any trouble getting people, but on the one performance, I can't remember exactly, but then the next one was Clovis, then Reading, then Livermore, and overnight to Sisters back to back, and then St. Paul, and then Spanish Fork. And it was 3-3 at Spanish Fork. Until I came along and started doing all this hustling, I think it was more to just to, you know, when world champions, after you're a world champion, especially the livestock, you know, most people don't remember. It's like the Academy Awards. You can't remember who won last year or, you know, 10 years ago. Lane was a really great guy. I got to know him in like '83, so I'd already known him for like 5 years. And he was just so nice and polite. And I remember at Cheyenne one year, he came up to me and he says, "Miss Sue, I grew up always wanting to have my photograph in the Rodeo Sports News, and I always figured it'd be a bucking picture, but I've been in there twice, and they're both your pictures, so I just wanted to thank you." This never happens, ever. But Lane did. You know, he thought to do that. And he was just this really nice guy, and he would visit with everybody, and the guys who were traveling with him, they called him the king because he'd be kissing babies and, you know, talking to everybody, and they'd be waiting and looking at their boots. They could have learned a lot from him. He was a great ambassador for the sport. So it became really big because I hustled it, and we made posters that he signed after, and then that after he won at Spanish Fork, there was like that year in Las Vegas, we got a booth it was in Cashman Field then, and I got the booth next to the roll-up door, and we put panels in and brought Red Rock in, and he was there all day, every day for Cowboy Christmas, and either John or Lane would be there with him, and then Lane was selling his videotapes, and I had t-shirts to sell and posters, and you know, nobody had really done that. And to this day, that's still like the biggest story that ever came out of rodeo. I mean, Sports Illustrated did a thing at the end. 8 seconds?
Yeah.
I've only seen it once. And I was so devastated when he died that I thought Luke Perry did an amazing job, and there were times that he looked like Lane, and it was spooky. And, you know, I mean, the thing was that it perpetuated his story. I mean, it wasn't real. It was Hollywood. But John Growney got to play himself. And by then, so after Lane died, I couldn't finish the book with Lane dying. John Growney, who owned Red Rock, he goes, "Well, why don't you move up here and I'll teach you the rodeo business." And so I ran the office, I did the bids, and in the summers when they left, I'd be the hub at the ranch and keep watch over everything, and learned about livestock and hay prices, and I have 3 degrees from Berkeley.
Yeah, at what point did you're like, what is my life?
When I was moving there from Berkeley, and I'm thinking, I have absolutely no background in this at all. So that was hilarious. But I picked it up pretty quickly, and it was a small town, and so a lot of people already knew who I was because I worked with John, who's like the golden child in Red Bluff. And then Red Rock was still around, and we did a lot of things with Red Rock as an ambassador for the sport. We took him down to Mill Valley to do pictures with all the, So here's this world champion bucking bull who could also have 30 kids on him and around him, and he was fine.
That's crazy.
Well, he was raised on a family milk cow because I guess his mom died, and they brought him in, and so he was really used to being with people. And so he did cow poop bingo for different events. And I guess they bid on the square, and wherever he pooped, that person won. And in a gymnasium, he was like sliding on the wood floor. And plus, like, what would you have to do to the floor afterwards? So here I am trying to finish my book. I get up to Red Bluff, make a big left turn into being the PR person for Lane and Red Rock, and then the next summer Lane gets killed. And that's why I ended up moving to Red Bluff. And I was there, I worked with John for like 5 years, and then I was offered a teaching job at Shasta College and started doing that, and I still kind of worked with them. And when social media showed up, I helped him do that. This guy named David, I forget his last name. Anyway, he did a documentary about Lane and Red Rock called Challenge of the Champions. And that put a lot of the information straight from 8 seconds. And then they did another documentary just recently that I wasn't involved in at all. They didn't want me or John. I just spent the last 4 years taking care of my mom, and she passed away in March at 92, and still a hoot. And I'm just getting my life back. Kelly Riley called me about 2 weeks after she died to tell me I was getting the Tad Lucas, and I was gobsmacked. When you're a photographer, especially from outside the sport, it's like I'm part of the rodeo family, but you don't expect something like this. And so getting ready to come here and sending the photographs and everything got me back working with the photographs, because I hadn't, for like 4 years. And I still have a lot of negatives to go through, and I still have to finish the book. But we're getting back there. It's very odd. I mean, photography jobs are basically they don't exist anymore, really, because everybody has an iPhone and it's good enough. And it used to be that when you got hired to do a job, you had to, it had to be good. So there are those people who have kept up with the equipment and everything. And I ended up taking a job out in the Marshall Islands. I was teaching up at Shasta College. One of my students got a job out in, I didn't know where, but in the middle of the Pacific. And she got out there, and the photo lab guy said, "Do you know how to do digital photography?" And she said, "No." But my teacher, Sue, she knows how to do it. So I get this call from this guy, and because of the time difference, we kept missing each other, but he offered me a job as I was going to be doing digital imaging for the Kwajalein Missile Range, which is part of U.S. Space and Missile Defense, and I'd be working for Raytheon. And so I said, well, what's the commute? Because I was living in Red Bluff. I had a job as the special collections photographer at Chico State, which is like an hour southeast. And then I also taught at night and on weekends at Shasta College, which was 40 minutes north of Red Bluff. So I was driving 700 miles a week. I was wearing out, the car was wearing out, but I loved those jobs. Mm-hmm. And I said, what's the commute? And he goes, oh, about 20 minutes by bicycle. And I thought, I'm going to get the rodeo book done.
Yeah.
Well, I get out there, and I end up being a person who already knows digital photography, and I knew how scanners worked, and I knew how printers worked and stuff like that. And so when I started working at the photo lab, entities on the island like Boeing and MIT, especially MIT, found out about me, and they would come and have me do their PowerPoint presentations and stuff. And then the wife of the chief medical officer and the wife of the guy who was the head of the MIT department out there, they knew about there were glass plate negatives in the museum, which was in the capital of Madro, and they knew that the last surviving son of the photographer was really worried about the glass plates. And so they go down and they tell Leonard DeBroom that there's this girl on the island now that we think she can help you with the glass plates. And so they come back and then tell me, so you know those glass plate negatives that are in the Alele Museum on Madro? And I said, yeah, I heard about them. Who's the photographer? It was a Marshallese guy. His dad was a whaler from the Azores. So when the whaling ships would leave Boston, they would go to the Azores and pick up crew. And then they would go around the Horn up to Hawaii, and then out into the Pacific whaling. And then after a while, they started getting copra, which is dried coconut, that could be used as for candles and for everything they've been using whale oil for. And it was easier to transport. And there was another guy who was from Germany who had taken a job as a copra trader and come to Hawaii, learned the copra business, the dried coconut business. And then he was on an island in the Marshall Islands, Ebon, and that's where Jose from the Azores ended up. They go into business together. They both have Marshallese wives, and they both have passels of kids. Well, not Jose and his wife, they just had the one, Joachim. Who is this Renaissance guy? He learns photography. He learns, Western medicine, and he knows Marshallese medicine. He learns Western ways of boat building, and already knows Marshallese ways of boat building. So he's this amazing guy, and he Well, plus his dad, Jose, and Adolf Capelli, his partner, they had a trading post and a shipbuilding and repairing business on an island called Likiep. And they, so all the sea captains knew where they were. And they got to know Joachim, and they would all bring him photographic supplies. So Joachim built a darkroom, and Leonard, when he was small, helped his dad in the darkroom. And the way they made prints was they'd open, like he knew when the sun was going to be coming in the right way, and they'd open a little hole on the side of the building, and it had hit the glass plate with the paper underneath, and that's how they'd expose, make prints. It was wild. And it was really interesting because all the stuff that I'd learned in documenting the rodeo culture helped in, saving these images. So this is like if Edward Curtis had been Native American and he photographed, Native Americans, so it'd be like from within. That's what Joachim de Broom was. And I knew that if I didn't digitize all these glass plates, they were gonna be gone because the air, which is so damp, had started eating away the emulsion on the glass. And during World War II, Leonard, with some friends, so there was a Japanese occupation of Likiep, and they'd heard that the Americans were coming and that they would probably bomb Likiep. So at night, they would sneak back to the house. So Joachim died in 1937, and then so the occupation with the army came in the early 1940s, and Leonard went back on a sailboat at night and got the glass plate negatives, took them to a small island up the atoll, and buried them. And so some of the plates had been stuck together with the seawater, and there was like salt crystals. So, you find this, and it was like, it was like fate. I had just figured out how to digitize glass plate negatives in my job at Chico State in special collections. And I get out there in the middle of serious nowhere where they just happen to have over 2,000 glass plate negatives. And I go, I see. I'm not here to work on my rodeo book. I'm here to do the glass plates. So we got a grant from Australia for the equipment. And at first I was doing it all volunteer nights and weekends. And then Raytheon lost the contract, and another company came in, and I told it's a military base, an army base, and we get a colonel, but only for like every 2 years, and then it's another one. So the colonel we had then, luckily, had been a history major in college, and he was tickled to death that this was happening. And because, the United States used Marshall Islands for nuclear testing, and we relocated a lot of people onto islands that were not inhabitable. And we almost killed a whole bunch of them by mistake. Well, they just weren't thinking. They thought that it was so out of, normal. It wasn't like it was the Marshall Islands were on everybody's radar. And so they thought, well, we can just blow up these islands. There were plenty of islands that could have blown up that didn't have people already living on them. So anyway, I thought, I'm just one person, but I can help save their history for them. And if I can do that, it's not going to make up for, you know, all the nuclear testing and all the people with radiation cancers and stuff, but I can do that. So I was there for 6 years. Didn't get the rodeo book done. And then when I came back, I developed a tremor, so my hands shook. And I went on a lot of different medications to see if it could help control it. But it would always come through, and the medications were just made me zombie-ish. So about 1.5 years ago, I had brain surgery.
Oh, boy.
And they put wires into my thalamus, and then I've got it's like a phone that has software on it and a communicator. My battery's right here, and
You're good.
when I'm like stressed, my hands still shake, but not like they used to. And my gait's weird. Like I kind of have this drunk pirate walk sometimes. Not all the time, but when I get tired especially. And I'm still working on the book.
Yeah.
I have not given up on it. Now I also have the Marshallese Project book to do also. So I'm looking for people, publishers, who are interested. And I'm still going through negatives. And I find stuff all the time.